The danger of this story comes from the brutal reality of being trapped inside a freezing wooden cabin by a relentless blizzard, watching your food and heat run out while nature slowly seals you in. My isolation began in early November when I rented a remote wooden cabin near the summit of Blackwood Mountain to complete my final manuscript away from city distractions. The first few days involved standard daily routines like chopping firewood, organizing my dry canned rations, and testing the propane stove in the small kitchen. On the fourth evening, a massive unpredicted blizzard swept over the ridge, knocking out the main power lines within hours and burying the access road under 6 feet of dense snow. I immediately checked the landline telephone on the wall, but the heavy ice accumulation had snapped the wires off the wooden pole outside. The temperature inside the living room plummeted rapidly, forcing me to burn through my initial stack of oak firewood in less than 48 hours. By the third day of the storm, the heavy snow drifted past the lower windows, completely blocking the front door and turning the interior of the cabin pitch black. I tried to force the heavy front door open with my shoulder, but the solid bank of ice packed against the exterior frame refused to budge even an inch. With no power or working heat, the pipes inside the bathroom froze solid and burst, dumping freezing water across the floorboards before turning into a solid sheet of ice. I began rationing my food to 1 small tin of cold beans per day, while scraping frost off the glass panes to melt into drinking water. The intense cold made my fingers stiff and purple, forcing me to wrap my hands in thick woolen socks just to hold a pencil or light a match. On the 6th night, the heavy snow accumulation on the roof caused a main support beam to crack loudly, sending plaster dust raining down onto my sleeping bag. I moved my thin mattress into the center hallway under the strongest archway, shivering uncontrollably as the temperature dropped to 10 below zero. To keep the fireplace burning, I began breaking down the pine dining chairs with a camping hatchet and throwing the broken wooden legs into the embers. My cell phone had been dead for days, but I kept staring at the black screen, hoping an emergency signal might somehow register on the network. The howling wind outside reached over 80 miles per hour, rattling the storm shutters so violently that 2 glass window panes shattered in the bedroom. I rushed into the room and dragged a heavy oak dresser across the floor to block the freezing gale blowing through the broken window. By the 9th day, I had burned every piece of wooden furniture in the cabin, leaving only the structural walls and my original paper manuscript. The 10th day brought no relief as the blizzard intensified, completely burying the cabin under a mountain of heavy snow and blocking the chimney flue entirely. Smoke began pouring back into the living room, forcing me to extinguish the last remaining fire to avoid suffocating in the enclosed space. I wrapped myself in 3 layers of heavy winter coats and climbed into 2 sleeping bags, but the freezing air penetrated right through the thick fabric. My remaining food supply was down to a single jar of peanut butter that had frozen as hard as a brick inside the pantry cupboard. I used my hatchet to chop small wooden splinters from the interior closet doors, trying desperately to ignite a small flame inside a metal trash can. The intense cold caused the wooden walls of the cabin to groan and pop loudly as the timber contracted under the crushing weight of the ice above. I realized that my family had no idea about my exact location because I had changed my rental reservation at the very last minute without telling anyone. My hands were so badly frostbitten that I could no longer grasp the hatchet handle or strike a match against the box without dropping it, driven by pure panic and the instinct to survive. I gathered my complete 400-page manuscript and began feeding the pages one by one into the tiny tin campfire. Watching months of my hard work turn into tiny bursts of ash gave me a few fleeting minutes of warmth against the creeping numbness in my legs. By the 13th day, the paper was entirely gone. The small tin fire went out, and the darkness inside the buried cabin became absolute and suffocating. My breathing became slow and shallow as hypothermia set in, rendering my feet completely numb and unable to support my body weight. I crawled across the icy floorboards toward the front entrance, dragging my lifeless legs behind me in a final desperate attempt to reach the door handle. I used my elbows to pull myself up against the ice-covered wood, beating my frozen fists against the solid door in the pitch dark until my skin tore open. No sound came from the outside world except the deafening, endless roar of the wind sweeping over the dead mountain ridge. Realizing that no rescue team was coming and that I was completely trapped in a frozen tomb of my own making, I collapsed onto the freezing floor and let the ice take over. One last question. If you were in her place at that moment, would you have done the same? Be honest. What does her choice deserve out of 10? Subscribe now. The best story is coming next.